So, The Phantom Menace has been released in theatres this year. Those of you paying close attention may have heard old Grogu say something along the lines of,
"Always two there are, no more, no less. A master and an apprentice."
However, when you inevitably click on one of the trailers for The Old Republic again, you may notice a tiny discrepancy. Take a look at this picture here, and count the amount of Sith you can see in the image transmitted to your visual cortex. If we think of 1,000 as being more than 2, then the results are quite interesting. The fact that someone at Lucasfilm knows how to count to 3 is encouraging, especially as it results in a trilogy of books explaining the origin of the Rule of Two and the happy-go-lucky guy who started it. Bane. No, not that one. In a long time ago, in a continuity far, far away, we're introduced to Des, a young man working in a brutal mine to pay off debts. This is 5 years after his abusive father died in a heart attack. Wait, what are those air quotes doing here? Des often gets into fights. There's one with another miner, and then with some soldiers of the Republic after a card game gone wrong. After a bit of manslaughter, he's urged by the local friendly canteen owner to go on the run and join the Sith army so he can rack up a proper body count. But there's something odd about Desi. He can sometimes see the future during fights. After he defies the orders of a superior officer, this talent eventually causes him to be offered a position in the Sith's new Brotherhood of Darkness. Okay, one of you's definitely been copying the other's homework. Unlike previous iterations of the Sith, these lot don't use the title Darth. Their leader, Khan, intended it to be an alliance of equals in an attempt to avoid the infighting that has plagued the Sith in the past. The Sith name Desmond takes is Bane, the insult his father used for him, the bane of his existence. It's a moniker that represents everything petty and cruel about his father. It represents what Des had to fear from him. But it's also demonstrative of how completely desensitized and numb Des is to abuse by the time he's a grown man. The name stopped mattering once his father was dead. Then he simply claims it years later. Any attempt to use it against him proves unsuccessful. It's kind of reflective of his attitude to his own trauma. He's constantly trying to turn it into strength, which is Dark Side 101. Star Wars is about nothing if not generational trauma. So now that I think about it, it's kind of blindingly obvious that the Sith Lord who came up with the Rule of Two must have had a shit dad. So when we see Sidious torture Maul or Vader now, it's recontextualized as part of a larger cycle of abuse. Centuries of masters and apprentices have just been reenacting Bane's initial mistreatment. So, lovely stuff. Unfortunately, I think that's about as far as depth goes in terms of character or theming for this first book. It's interesting to watch Bane, whilst he's an apprentice, work out all the little hypocrisies in the Brotherhood's teachings and how it clashes with the Sith tenets at the base foundation. The Sith's core teachings don't promote equality, so the Brotherhood's very existence is plagued by inconsistencies. The rules against infighting clash when the Academy encourages such brutal competition between its apprentices. So when Bane goes rogue and starts learning all he can about the ancient Sith, he has a bit of a light bulb moment.
Two there should be, no more, no less. One to embody the power, the other to crave it. The Rule of Two.
So you understand why Bane arrives at the conclusions he does. But the fact that his pursuit is met with total success means that the path of destruction isn't left with much to say. Bane's new ideology isn't self-defeating, and the man doesn't have any issue paying the toll it takes to become a monster. You could say similar things about Palpatine's rise to power in the prequels, but aside from that not being the biggest problem with those films, the Empire's emergence is attributed more to the shortcomings of the Republic and the Jedi than anything positive about the Sith. It's a bit like what I keep saying about Resolution's depiction of the Daleks. Making Daleks do Dalek things is inherently cool to watch. It's just a little bit shallow. Like, I'm sorry if I come across as a bit skeptical of big muscly dudes who keep banging on about how great the past is, but being on the internet will do that to you. Perhaps this is churlish. We do have 2 more books after this, and Bane at least had to succeed in wiping out most of the Sith because, well, they can't be around in the future. I suspect the material he has with his apprentice might be of more interest to me. Back when I cared about Disney's Star Wars output, I always wanted to see more of the Sith's perspective than the Jedi. Jedi we've done to death. Give me a TV series or a movie about the Sith at their prime. I want to see the academies, where future sociopaths are raised in strange cult-like environments, mostly out of nostalgia from my time in Catholic school. This book certainly scratches that itch, but it also demonstrates some of the potential shortcomings with trying to do this kind of premise. But for the story it chooses to tell, Path of Destruction's well put together. A lot of it is characters clarifying the motivations internally, which can get a bit woolly when their allegiances change as much as they do. The pacing in particular is excellent. It's divided into 3 parts, each one marking a different point in Bane's journey. It's simple stuff, but after reading some of the V&As and EDAs and seeing how they struggle to pace their stories, this was very easy to get through, though being an audiobook definitely helped. Speaking of which, I've got some notes on sound design and music. They use a lot of existing Star Wars tracks, and some of it's okay, but other times it doesn't quite fit. A fist fight between 2 blokes in a mine probably shouldn't have the same score as an epic space battle. Well, I think that's everything. I give it a resounding 2 evenings worth of entertainment out of 10. Though, one final point for everyone who complained about Rey's lack of training in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, I've got something to play you.
To his surprise, he discovered that his inexperience with the Force was the exception rather than the rule. Many of the students had trained for months or years before they'd been accepted at the Academy on Korriban. At first, Bane found this troubling. He'd just started his training, and he was already behind. In such a competitive, ruthless environment, he would be an easy target for every other student. But as he mulled it over, he began to realize he might not be as vulnerable as he'd thought. He alone, of all the apprentices at the Academy, had been able to manifest the power of the dark side without any training at all. He'd used it so often, he'd come to take it for granted. It had given him advantages over his opponents in cards and brawling. In war, it had warned him of danger and brought him victory in otherwise impossible circumstances. And he'd done it all on instinct, with no training, without even any conscious idea of what he was doing.
When Darth Bane first started his Sith dynasty, he had nothing but a dream, and his dad-killing powers.